Entrepreneurship is really a valuable form of gaining self-knowledge, because what I've seen is that all of us have strengths and weaknesses, vulnerabilities, things we're not good at. In a 9 to 5, you're hired because you have a specific set of skills and you do a couple things and you do them well. And whatever your weaknesses are, you might not need to address them. A startup is going to find every single weakness that you have. Once you gain that self-knowledge that these are your weaknesses, the startup becomes a vehicle of self-transformation, because either you overcome those disadvantages or weaknesses, or you delegate them to someone else who can solve those problems, or the company's toast.
Welcome everyone to this episode of the Liberty Ventures podcast. I'm Alexander McCobin, founder and CEO of Liberty Ventures. And as a reminder, what we're doing with Liberty Ventures is building the ecosystem of values-aligned business leaders, investors, executives, and entrepreneurs who are all committed to advancing a free and prosperous future. And our commitment is to help you scale your business, to scale your impact for that. And today, I am just absolutely thrilled to be talking with Michael Gibson, who not only have I known for probably almost a decade now when we first met, and we'll get into that, but who, when we first started conceptualizing Liberty Ventures, was one of the very first people to not only encourage me and my partner at the time to get this going, but also served as a founding advisor to Liberty Ventures and is just doing incredible things over the course of his career, and especially now with 1517. Michael, thanks for joining us today, and just thank you for everything to help us get to where we are now.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And I just have to say, I'm just so impressed. And, it's just incredible to see how much progress you've made with Liberty Ventures since we first had those phone calls and conversations. It seems like you really have struck a nerve that there is this demand for supporting entrepreneurial endeavors, but also somehow this dual mission of doing that while promoting liberty, which is really incredible to see.
Really, your encouragement and advice early on was critical to get us to where we are. But let's start off by providing context for everyone as to why I asked you for advice with this, and your background here, because it's a really diverse and interesting one that I resonate with. But let's take a couple of minutes. I'd love it if you just share your personal story that's led to who you are and what you're doing with 1517 now.
Well, you and I actually have similar background in some ways, because I know you studied philosophy in grad school. I did as well. I thought I was going to be a professor. I really deep down wanted to write, which is why I dropped out. I didn't finish I was working towards a PhD, but deep down, I really wanted to write. I was drawn to the subject matter of philosophy. Certainly some of the big questions I still love to read on. And so you can see a few of my philosophy books back there. Yeah. But one common strand that has certainly stayed with me and acted as a guide in some ways through some of the things I'll describe shortly, which is this commitment to liberty and autonomy. Maybe liberty more broadly conceived as certainly concerns about coercion and state power and limits, and imposing limits upon that, but also in the way that we live our lives. You might consider it some kind of like if coercion and state power are forms of external coercion or control. I'm certainly interested also in inner freedom as well, which would mean how do we free our minds to, explore this universe, to discuss ideas on an individual level. How do we prevent ourselves from being captured by ideology or herd mentalities or groupthink or even just impulsivity, right? I think there are ways that, we can guide and structure our lives that it can be broadly construed as freedom-oriented. So I dropped out. I got a job as a writer for MIT's Technology Review. That was sort of just luck and happenstance, because my girlfriend at the time lived in Boston. She was a student at Harvard. And so I knew I wanted to write, and they're based in Cambridge. So it happened, I got the job. That led to me covering science and technology through a series of unlikely events. I wrote a story about Max Levchin, the co-founder, CTO of PayPal. That opened I didn't know who the PayPal mafia was. And at that time, that was like 2007. SpaceX had been started, Tesla too, but they were nowhere near what they are now today. So I was introduced to this cast of characters: Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, Steve Chen, founder of YouTube. Like really, by that I mean became aware of these people, and then lastly Peter Thiel, who was this vaguely public intellectual libertarian who was also a hedge fund manager and just really stood out to me as an interesting person. So eventually I was always curious about that, and I went to a festival and I met some people who worked for Peter, and they said there was this job opening they needed a writer researcher at the hedge fund. And because Peter was Peter, I was interested, and I ended up in a job interview with Peter, and we just got along. We talked about philosophy for an hour, discussing the ideas of Rene Girard, some ideas about what are the failures of libertarians when it comes to social thought. There was an interesting conversation, and we just hit it off. So he asked me if I would help, come work for him and help him teach a class on technology and politics at Stanford in the law school. So I in essence, be a glorified TA for Peter. And I was like, all right, this is a fascinating experience. I got to take this job. So then I said yes. I show up to work the first day. It was about a month later, and the night before, Peter had decided to start what became the Thiel Fellowship. He had this idea he wanted to give grants out to people to work on things outside of school. But there was nothing there. I showed up to work the first day and basically got pulled into that. Peter had a talk at a conference, or a Q&A interview at a TechCrunch Disrupt, this big conference at the time. And so he wanted to announce it then. I can tell you the day because it was my first day, September 27th, 2010. I think, in retrospect, The Social Network was set to come out, the movie, long ago, starring written by Aaron Sorkin, and detailing behind the scenes, supposed behind the scenes at Facebook. So I think Peter wanted to get a jump on that news cycle, and by launching the fellowship that day, he certainly stirred the pot, and I got pulled into it and ended up co-running that program with some people over 5 years.
So wait, let me just jump in there to emphasize this point. So you were a philosophy grad student who then went to go work for Peter, thinking it was going to be doing research and help teach a class. And on the first day, you got the incredible Thiel Fellowship, the 20 under 20 program, thrown into your lap as the new thing you're going to take on.
Basically, yes. And I thought I was, unique in Peter's world. But as I worked with him, and if you read about PayPal, for instance, Peter is very interesting as a manager, let's say CEO type. He does not care much about experience. He thinks it's overrated. He much would rather hire ambitious, creative, intelligent people and just throw them at a problem and figure it out. He always said, like, if PayPal, if any of them had experience in fintech or banking or payments before starting the company, they never would have started it, because there would have been too many challenges and objections that they would have called in advance. But because they were young and naive, they had no choice but to solve these challenges. So I think he as I've seen him throughout his career, he stuck to that. And as soon as I showed up to work the first day, there were tons of people like me who were dropouts of one sort or another. Maybe they attained some level of achievement in one domain, but now suddenly they're working in finance. So it's like we had nuclear engineers, statisticians, English lit PhDs, but no one with a background in finance and no MBAs. That was an absolute negative signal for Peter. Ultimate insider badge.
And for anyone who doesn't know about the fellowship, that fits very well in with the concept of the fellowship too.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And Peter was the first outside investor in Facebook. And Zuckerberg was famously 19 when he started, probably 20, I think, when he pitched Peter. So that was certainly in his mind. We started, we created the conditions of the fellowship that day. So it was, you had to be under 19 or 19 and under when you applied, and you had to not be enrolled in school. $100,000, 20 people. So yeah, Peter, I think very much in his mind, I think he sees, this goes back to that point, is like, and I mentioned Rene Girard, the French literary theorist, anthropologist, who's one of his main spiels is about how we tend to imitate others. Girard is very concerned with witch hunts, scapegoating, crowd dynamics. And I think Peter sees that as very much as an imposition on our freedom. And when you think about in America, there's this monolithic path to success that most parents and teenagers think is necessary, which means trying as hard as you can to get into a good college, going to that good college, and then embarking on your path to finance, management consulting, maybe lawyering, maybe doctoring, but pretty straightforward path. And I think Peter wanted to throw a monkey wrench into that by creating the fellowship. So yeah, really, really challenging because I had to get up to speed on a lot. Philosophy is a great subject when it comes to reasoning and clarifying concepts, but it's not so great when it comes to understanding nuclear power or SaaS enterprise tools. So I had a lot to learn about, but ran that program for 5 years, and we saw a lot of tremendous, incredible stories come out of it. Probably the most notable is Vitalik Buterin. We helped him launch Ethereum in 2013, 2014. But other people like Dylan Field with Figma, if people have seen that tool, incredible company there. It was at that point at 2015 where me and one of my colleagues, Danielle Strackman, I think you're going to talk to her soon as well. She's a charter school founder, principal in San Diego. She started a school. She mainly an educator at heart, and she has no background in finance. And in 2015, we started our VC fund, 1517, and really to extend that mission of the fellowship to liberate people from institutional constraints, or from to help them pursue their passions, even if the world is against them. And they don't have credentials. And so, yeah, we've been doing that for 8 years. I get asked often, how do you get a job in venture capital or Silicon Valley on the investment side? And if I'm like, I have this story I just told in some fashion, it's like, that is not instructive in any way. You can't just study philosophy, become a journalist, wind up working for, the most eccentric libertarian billionaire in Silicon Valley. But nevertheless, I learned a lot during that time. And so when you approached me, like Peter, I had come to see that maybe investment experience, specifically in VC, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not in a good position to do something great. So I think that's why we had our conversation.
I appreciate that, Michael. And to recap this, and maybe throw a few things in that I only picked up because of your book, Paper Belt on Fire, which I can't recommend highly enough to everyone. When you were running the Thiel Fellowship, you started to realize you were helping all of these great entrepreneurs out, and there were investment opportunities here that you had actually missed out on. I think you actually wrote in the book that you didn't buy Ethereum when it first started because, well, for one reason or another, you just didn't do that and realized, wow, how big of an opportunity that would have been.
Yeah, big miss in my career was, and I was even helping to market the initial coin offering, but I did not have the savings I have then, and also because the fellowship was a nonprofit, we were giving out grants. It generally not looked upon well by the IRS if you're working in a nonprofit and then benefiting from your grantees. So we definitely we weren't allowed, like in a more formal, let's say, a Delaware C Corp started by a Thiel Fellow, we could not invest in at that time because there were these types of constraints. So but I blame myself. I should have bought a couple thousand at least. I don't know. A buddy of mine did, and he made a few million. And I always, Danielle jokes because she noticed this guy didn't buy me a beer when we went out, and she's like, he should be buying you beers for the rest of your life. So that we saw these great companies, and the fellowship still continues to this day, and I think it's a wonderful program. But there's this opportunity for upside. And what's more is if we made money through investments, we could expand on the mission and help more people in different different ways. So that was the idea. I think there is something to be said for, it's this old notion that like, people think making profit is not good. If you ask the average college student, oh, is it more noble to work at a nonprofit or a for-profit? I bet the majority these days would be like, oh, the nonprofit is just so wonderful. But what I've come to see is like most nonprofits are ineffective or sometimes just evil. And then on the other side, it's like the for-profits are underrated in terms of the good they do in the world. One could argue, I think, that Bill Gates did more for the world as the head of Microsoft than he'll ever do through the Gates Foundation. But that's debatable, sure. But I think in general, though, we underestimate how great it is to make profit. And so when we launched the fund, people are like, oh, but there's this grant program. I'm like, yeah, but it's good to, everyone wins if if we're making money.
And so what I love about what you've done with the 1517 fund is you are bringing more capital to the table and a different structure to help all of these incredible entrepreneurs out. And that was the opportunity available by you moving on from the Thiel Fellowship, which is still going on itself, but you and Danielle went and started this fund to invest in those same kinds of entrepreneurs, those who aren't going through the traditional educational institutional process and have great ideas and opportunities to build tremendous companies.
That's right. Yeah. So we learned a lot running the fellowship. One of the things was just learning what it's like to be a angel investor. The first money into a company. The grant went to an individual, so it was more like let's say, more guidance, mentorish, life coaching. But that was important because even as an angel investor, you start to add on financial elements or strategic elements to the business, which are important to consider. But I think as an investor at the earliest stages, you still have to be something of a guide or a caddy, call it. You're not calling shots, but you see the landscape for people and tell them what you think. But you also have to be a sounding board and a little bit of a life coach as well. So I think the time that Danielle and I spent working with the Thiel Fellows prepared us to work with entrepreneurs to help them get started. There's all the like commodified stuff too that you pick up on, which is like, oh, how do you incorporate? What does the back office accounting look like, and that kind of stuff. But I think the important matter is just being there as a good advisor guide for the entrepreneurs.
So there's a lot I want to dig into now and actually getting some advice for the ecosystem from all of this experience that you have. And let's start actually with what you learned about being an angel investor and even just picking the people that you back. What are some of the things that you've learned to really look for in entrepreneurs when you've got your investor hat on?
Well, the fellowship was interesting because we were focusing on character, on people. They certainly had ideas and would present them, and they had a plan for what they wanted to work on. But we really had to count on, was this person, did they have the set of characteristics that we think might lead to success? And we had to learn on the fly. The first year we ran the program, it was an application. It was very imitative of college applications. We asked for GPA, test scores, achievement awards, all that stuff. And in the event, we found it wasn't much predictive value when it came to seeing if this person could thrive out in the wild. We met some things were negative. One was like the Intel Science Award. There was something about that competition that lent itself, I think, to let's say virtue signaling, or it was more of a popularity contest rather than like a hardcore look at some technologies. So it's like you saw people, focusing on really socially aware type issues, less on hard tech. So at any rate, we going through this a couple of years in, and we saw that stuff was useless, and we just really came to see that the character of the people mattered most. And it's tough to get that on an application. So we started doing a lot more outbound, spending more time with people long before they got the grant, just so we knew what they were, who they are, and what they're capable of. And now we bring the same framework to bear when it comes to investing. I think every investor, especially at the angel stage and the seed stage, they're going to use three main elements to evaluate any opportunity. The first is the team. The second is the market opportunity. Just how big of a company could this become? And the last is the current state of the product. Every investor has their emphasis, and that'll determine their style. Peter Thiel probably has 650 dimensions that he considers in 4-dimension chess, but us mortals rely on those three. We have come to see over time, though, that the character of the team is the number one thing. When we look over our history of working with people again and again, it's like that is the decisive factor, and not, let's say, the current state of the product. That's the least important for us, the current state of the product, because so much is going to change over time. So we really do focus on people. We've developed a list of character traits. Some of them we've just made up because I couldn't find anything in the literature on this. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. But some of it is pretty straightforward. Some of it is just, do you have the skills to build what you say you're going to build, or do you have grit and perseverance? Those are important. Another one is we met a lot of lone geniuses who could engineer the hell out of anything, but they were very disagreeable people who had trouble working with others, and therefore they couldn't build a team. And so we learned that you had to have the social emotional intelligence in order to work with employees, sell to customers, raise money from investors. I mean, these are very tough, emotionally driven social interactions, and some people just don't have that in them. So we've developed this framework. It's almost like computer vision, where we think this is our training set, the Thiel Fellowship, all the interviews, all the phone calls. Now that we're hearing pitches with 15, 17, and so on, we're constantly feeding this information into the computer vision in our brain, which is this a promising entrepreneurial team or individual? And then we make a judgment call based on, hey, does it look like does it have the right feel here for, the character we're looking for, the right stuff? Now, the funny thing is, like I in my book, you mentioned, is I spent a whole chapter trying to describe some of these traits. But what I'd say is, like, in the course of doing this, I've read all sorts of other books in different domains on this topic. One of my favorite is a book on the real Top Gun. The author, in a short section, talks about some of the traits they look for in pilots for the real Top Gun. And of the 8, I would say 6 of them are traits that we look for in entrepreneurs. So you might say, oh, if Mike got hired to work at Top Gun, would he be good at picking pilots? And the answer is absolutely not. It's like, even though I'm looking for what we say are the same traits, the thing is I think it's all contextualized it's very domain specific. Here Hayek's use of knowledge in society, I think, is true, is like, you get to the forefront in some really obscure niche, it's going to have a very specific knowledge that is often tacit and hard to communicate. And I think these types of evaluations fit those conditions. So even if I try to describe these character traits, it's like, that's not a recipe that someone can just take and then try to use.
Right, because you describe it as a computer vision, but it's not an actual algorithm. You're not plugging it in. It is your judgment and the experience that you've developed, both taking advantage of good opportunities, missing opportunities before, and also seeing what doesn't work.
Yeah, known bets 1,000, right? Too. So, and you should add as well, I got to apprentice with Peter Thiel, who could be, sure, one of the great investors of our time. So certainly learned a lot from him. Again, tacit knowledge, not that he directly said what he was in any case looking at, but just I don't know, it's weird how knowledge is transferred in these situations. Maybe it's just by observing. But yeah, I think that's right. In venture investing, there's a power law return, so that if you build a portfolio, typically, let's say you had 50 investments you made, you might expect 2 to really work out, maybe 1 to return all your investors' money and more, which means 48 of those companies are going to fail. So even if you're great, even if you're Peter Thiel, you're still batting, 300 tops. I don't know. It's just really hard. And it's not just the on the investor side. I mean, God, these poor entrepreneurs, they're staking their whole lives and dreams on these things. So, venture capital has an element of risk, but nowhere near the amount of risk that entrepreneurs take on for themselves, and the failure rates. So we've worked with a lot of companies that have failed, and I hope they've learned a lot and gained a lot of experience from that. But I know we have as well, and I think to go to maybe the broader point about liberty is like, this is what it takes to improve the standards of living, to advance our civilization. And it can be a beautiful process. It can be a terrifying process, but nevertheless, this is what it takes, because it's just so hard. I have a more profound admiration now for business, for entrepreneurship. I understood it in theory back when I studied philosophy and economics and so on, but actually seeing people stake their lives on a business, and then to see what it takes to create something that people want, a great product, a wonderful service, is so hard. It's just so hard. And so every I walk around the world now and I'm just in awe of all these businesses that have managed to survive and last. It's like, oh my God, incredible. What a miracle.
100%. And so you've given some great advice for the investors in the network. Let's talk about the entrepreneurs there, because it is a brutal process to be an entrepreneur. And as you said, you not only make investments, you've been in the weeds actually coaching them, advising them, helping them think through how to grow this. So what are some of the most common things you find yourself helping entrepreneurs with, giving advice on, or that you think more entrepreneurs in the Liberty Ventures ecosystem should be paying attention to?
In my more life coaching moments, I've come to see entrepreneurship is really a valuable form of gaining self-knowledge. Because what I've seen is that all of us have strengths and weaknesses, vulnerabilities, things we're not good at. And I think in a 9 to 5, you're hired because you have a specific set of skills and you do a couple things and you do them well. And no, whatever your weaknesses are, you might not need to address them. But the thing about a startup is it is going to find every single weakness that you have as a person. So let's say you're conflict avoidant and you have trouble having difficult conversations. Guess what? Your startup is going to identify that for you. Let's say you're introverted and you're shy and you don't like making cold phone calls or walking up to strangers at conferences. Guess what? Your startup is going to identify that and point it out to you. Now, as a CEO founder, or just, as a founder in general, once you gain that self-knowledge that you're not, these are your weaknesses, now the startup becomes a vehicle of self-transformation, because either you overcome those disadvantages or weaknesses, or you delegate them to someone else who can solve those problems, or the company's toast. So I don't think you can get that into a 9 to 5. Why do extreme sports people do what they do? Why do surfers surf big waves, jump out of airplanes and so on? I think these people are interested in testing their limits. There's some things we can't know in this world, certainly not from an armchair. And one of them is what we're capable of and what our limits are. And startups I've seen are one of these tools that can help us find what we're capable of, because you have no idea how transformative it can be to overcome these challenges within yourself. And so what I find myself talking to entrepreneurs most about are some of these actually social emotional type things, because they've got some key player that hasn't worked out after a year or two, and now they have to have a really tough conversation where they basically firing someone, and they've never had to do that before. That's really hard. Or maybe they've been in the business, maybe it's time to shut the business down, and they've dedicated too much of their time to this, and it's their baby, and now their life is off track and they could be doing something else. That's a tough conversation. So it tends to be these types of things that I talk to entrepreneurs about the most. Sometimes it's just plain old business strategy, which market to launch in, what's the path to market. A lot of them come to us for macro advice. So a lot of entrepreneurs are so far in the weeds that they're not thinking about, is the Fed going to cut rates, or are we heading into a recession, that type of thing. But they do need to know that broader perspective, because it's going to influence the amount of capital available for them down the road? So those types of questions come up. But for me, I think time and time again, I just find it comes back to these real deep life questions about, who am I? What am I capable of? And what can I do to shore up those weaknesses?
I think that's a brilliant piece of advice for entrepreneurs to make sure they're engaged in that self-reflection to really understand themselves. And as you said, either overcome that deficiency to delegate it to other people or recognize that's going to risk the whole company. That is such valuable advice for them.
Yeah, one of the downward spirals we've seen too is a team dynamic is um, well, the analogy we use is imagine an emergency room operating table, and there's a patient, on the way to dying of something. And imagine if instead of trying to solve the problem of this patient dying, suddenly because of frustrations, the team started fighting with each other, like and making it really personal. It's like, oh, you never studied in medical school, you were a terrible student, and so on. We see this happen with companies where the product isn't quite right, maybe the market is smaller than they thought, and the company's struggling. And instead of solving those issues, it turns into this personal warfare. The number one reason startups fail is that they make something no one really wants. It's not good enough. It's only marginally better. It's just not something anyone really needs or wants to pay money for, because it's really hard to create value. But number two is the human factor. Things blow up all the time because these animosities come out and things get personal. We've seen brothers and sisters stop talking to each other for a long time because of these types of disagreements. So it's a crucible. Number three, I think, for why startups fail. It's probably not. What I want to say is, like, number four is probably the tech. It's so interesting, is you would think it would be like, hey, the technology didn't work. These people were mad scientists, but it's always like, okay, it turned out this wasn't what we thought it was, or the human factor. There's just too much fire in the crucible. Things blow up. Number three is probably it's just not big enough. It's like you thought you were entering into an ocean. It turned out to be a pond in terms of market sizing. Something like that. But number four would be, oh, it turned out we didn't know how to invent this thing.
Michael, this is invaluable. I really appreciate this. And to respect your time, I've just got one more question for you. And to provide context, I always tell people, if you want to learn something new, you want to get into a new industry, you want to start a business, you want to connect with someone, best thing to do is not to reach out and ask for something, but to reach out and offer to help someone out. And so I'm wondering if anyone's listening to this and wants to connect with you, wants to learn from you in some way, what's something that they might be able to reach out and offer to do to help that you would be excited to see and respond to?
I'm always interested in meeting people. So if anyone can help me do that, that's wonderful. And by meeting people, I mean, do you have connections to student entrepreneurs? Do you have connections to a hacker house someplace? Those types of intros are fantastic. We're constantly trying to invent a new playbook because campuses look different than they did, or people grow up and move on and they no longer have connections to campus. So we're constantly trying to refresh our talent pipeline. So if you know anyone who's young, doesn't have a college degree, might be interested, doesn't even have to be building a company today, but might be. I love meeting those people. Beyond that, nothing else comes to mind. But yeah, I just love meeting interesting, talented people. So that would be number one.
Fantastic. And for anyone, I'll give another plug again. If you haven't read Paper Belt on Fire, highly recommend it. One of the best business books I've read, an amazing story about the start of 1517 and everything Michael's doing with some great advice. Michael, just thank you for taking the time with us. Thanks for all your help for what we're doing with Liberty Ventures and just being an awesome guy.
Yeah, thank you, man. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.